Hello comrades, Commissar Bro here today to talk about the Ultimate General series and what we can hope is next for it. I've actually been playing a lot of Ultimate General lately, and you can imagine just playing so much of it's got me hyped. I've actually probably put in like 20 some odd hours just in the past couple of days playing through the Union campaign. I never actually played as the Union side, I always played as a Confederate side just because it was, in my opinion, harder, so that's what I wanted to play. Needless to say, it's got me excited. So this is going to be a poorly worded, poorly thought out, and overall probably not what you're looking for video, but ignore all that and come into it with an open mind. If you disagree with any opinions I may have here, feel free to discuss them in the comments below. I'll answer most, if not all, comments that hit my channel, so don't really be surprised if we end up sparking up a conversation regarding the future of the Ultimate General series. And anyway, let's move right on with point one. The biggest thing people are wondering what's going to happen next with the Ultimate General series is, what era will it take place in? Is it going to be like a Napoleonic era, or will it be like, you know, the Total War games that inspired it, you know, and gone into more fantastical elements? Hopefully they don't oversimplify it, but we'll talk about that in the next little bit. To give you kind of a little background of Ultimate General, the games were originally created by the maker of the Darth mods, and then several other developers who joined together to create Game Labs. First, we got Ultimate General Gettysburg, a solid title that served as a prototype of sorts for the eventual Civil War game you see here now. At this point, both games have taken place in the American Civil War era. So, what's going to come next? Is it going to be colonial warfare? Will we actually see a war in Europe? Or is it going to be in the Americas again? Personally, in my opinion, with the engine they've created here, they have free reign to really expand into anything that they want. Just watching how combat works in-game, I could see not only an easy transition into Napoleonic warfare, but any type of warfare from the 14th century upwards to the start of World War I. Most likely, the next game will probably take place in the Napoleonic era, just because it seems most fans seem to want that. But it would also be the most realistic transition from the types of cannons being used and the types of guns being used, and also the importance of cavalry and so on and so forth. Personally, though, I would like to see this engine emulate ancient or medieval warfare. I believe it could do it, and I believe it would be really interesting to watch as well. Some people probably don't agree with that philosophy, and they'd rather stick with the gun, you know, the muskets, well, not really muskets, the rifles and so on and so forth, or even muskets and so on, because again, it would be an easy transition. They could reuse most of the effects and most of the assets they've already created in game. So that's far more likely. I think if they did decide to stay with the colonial warfare, or if they stayed in the Napoleonic warfare eras, I would love to see ship battles, the inclusion of naval battles, and so on. In Civil War, you have ironclads occasionally show up, but you can't control them, and there's nothing you can really do with them. They just kind of act as artillery pieces that hang out in the background. Personally, I would like to see that used in like actual active way, that you can move the ironclads, or you can move the ships. You can actually get more of the ships, and they can have an overall impact of the battles you're playing, and so on. And that's assuming they stick with the era. If they decide to go to a medieval era, or an ancient era, or even a fantasy setting, I mean, we've seen with Total War that it can be done. You can go from making Empire Total War and Napoleon Total War with muskets and pike and shot and stuff like that to Total War Warhammer, and I believe this engine could also do something similar. Just from what I can tell, and again, I'm not a developer, but from what I can see, is it looks like to me, setting-wise, it's very open what they can do and what they cannot do. So there's a lot of speculation, in my opinion, on what they will do, and I really hope they're not afraid to take risks. But at the same point in time, I want them to do what is going to end up being the best game. And if they think that it's going to be more realistic that a Napoleonic warfare game is going to be the best bet, then hey, I'm more than happy with that. That's going to be fine either which way. So I just kind of wonder where they're going to go. So my second point, expanding gameplay features. I think it's clear that the next game really needs to expand upon certain features. For example, one of the largest bummers of this particular game was the lack of a multiplayer component. The first game featured multiplayer, and although in my experiences it didn't function very well, it was there. Civil War, being as fun and epic of a game as it is, completely lacked multiplayer at all, which is a shame because I could totally see multiplayer working very well with this game. In the more recent Total War titles, you can actually give some of your units and play co-op battles. And so, for example, if I have cavalry that I don't really want to mess around with, and one of my friends is watching the battle with me, I can give him all of my cavalry units, and then it's up to him to actually control my cavalry, and we work together to overcome the enemy army. I believe that can be done here, and it would be a really fun thing to do. You're playing through these, let's just take Civil War for example, you're playing through these real long campaigns, these real long battles, and as you get further and further in towards 1865, the battles become absolutely gigantic. And even this particular battle here, you're watching Stones River, you can tell that it almost becomes overwhelming for me. Now, I know there's plenty of players who are far faster and they can handle it much better than me, but I'm going to be honest with you, when I'm having to handle over 60 to 80 units, it does get a bit overwhelming. So it would be cool if I could actually give a portion of my troops to a friend fighting against me with the AI. I just believe it would provide for an interesting challenge and make for a fun game. The game has already got custom battles and so on, so to me it seems like it would just flow, assuming they perform something as such. But again, I'm not a developer. There's probably plenty of hurdles coming along with that that kept them from doing it with Civil War, but who knows. So the expansion of the campaign map would be another gameplay feature I would want to see. Already managing the types of weapons that your soldiers were using was really cool, and having to manage money along with recruit numbers as well as being successful in your battles is pretty much a balancing act to successfully guide the war effort was really cool. Personally, I would love to see more features like this, more weapons available for use in battles depending on the era, more customization of one's troops and armies, the ability to allocate resources such as industry, money, and materials throughout battles and so on, even if you got to control which battles you were fighting to maybe change the war and so on. A bit closer to like Panzer Corps, where Panzer Corps will let you play alternate historical scenarios that never actually happened. They were just hypothetical things if the war had gone a separate way, which would be really cool. From what I've played so far in this game, there's nothing like that. There might be a couple of battles here and there that might have not exactly gone perfectly to history, but either which way, you can end up changing the war by the end of it, but the beginning portions of the war don't seem to change much. You're still going to play through all the famous battles and so on. So it would be really cool if you could actually change the campaign up a bit, maybe more alternative history and so on. Another concept I would like to bring up would be like the ability to create a factory on the map. Let's take again Civil War as the example. If you could create a factory that could constantly pump out a certain quantity of guns each month in game, would be really cool. The factory could have upkeep, or it could have a certain amount that it's needed to create it, or even just rely on political support, but then it would be dedicated to producing that select gun or weapon. And as you fight through battles, you proceed to get more and more weapons from this particular factory. Now, it could be one set weapon, it could be a multitude of weapons and differing quantities of weapons showing up. Of course, this would be less historical, and it would be kind of more of a sandbox at that point in time. But it would still be really fun to further allow you, because there's some weapons, like for example in Civil War, that you're just not gonna get. Or if they're lost at some point, any point in your war that you're fighting, they're gone for good, and you're not gonna be able to replace them. The Whitworth rifles in particular is something I'm kind of looking at. Now, I don't think you should be able to mass produce Whitworth rifles like crazy, but it would be cool if you could spend, you know, a couple thousand of your in-game dollars to be able to produce just a couple, to at least sustain a unit with them, rather than constantly pumping out huge armies worth of Whitworth rifles. So, just as an example. Now again, the system that's already in the game kind of simulates something like this. It just assumes you get it with the political support. But again, I would like a little bit more direct control over my future rather than just being limited to the political support system. Either which way, though, additional options to mess around more with the campaign map would be really cool and something I'd like to see. Point number 3. continued attention to detail. Although you may not see it, this game has a lot going on under the hood. Take a look at the artillery in the game, for example. There are ways to optimize arty usage, from the ranges of your guns, from where they're firing from, to the shells they're using, to the types of the guns themselves. While you yourself can maximize usage of cannons, depending on how you use them, a lot of the game is kind of on autopilot, like what shells they're using at different ranges, for example. Things like this should stay in, this attention to detail, from the underlying stats of the guns and their differences to the nuances of melee combat. It doesn't need to be overly simplified any further like we're starting to see with some of the newer Total War games, but this approach keeps the feel of a video game while still feeling realistic in a sense. But it's not overwhelming the player, having to switch between abilities. I'm going to use an example. Take Dawn of War 3. One of the big reasons I believe that game failed was its reliance on micromanagement. I shouldn't have to tell my soldiers how to shoot their guns when an enemy comes within a certain range. I just shouldn't. I'm a commander. I'm telling them where to be, where to stand, and where they need to fight the enemy. They were the soldier who was trained. They should know how they're supposed to fight at point blank range. For example, this cannon, this artillery brigade. As far as I'm concerned, they should know far more about how to fire that cannon than I should know, because they're the ones trained on the cannon. So this reflects in the game as me not having to sit there and press the, fire canister shot button, as opposed to them just doing it themselves. It makes sense. It just makes sense. These are trained soldiers. They're not just regular old Joes who've been handed a rifle and told to go fight. They're individuals who've been trained, taught how to use their weapon, even if it wasn't for a long time, to where they have at least a basic understanding of what they're doing and how they should fight the enemy. With this in mind, I want to keep stuff like that. I want to make sure that continues on. I don't want to see an overcomplication of weapons or abilities. This is perfect. Literally how it is done right now is perfect, and they should not change that overall thought process. As I was mentioning previously, continued attention to detail. I want to continue seeing those underlying stats of the guns and their differences to the nuances of melee combat. I want to continue to see that type of stuff in the next Ultimate General games. Point number 4. I kind of briefly hinted at this one before and even directly mentioned it, but I would want to see increased customization options. One of the best and most immersive pieces of this particular game was the fact that you could name your units and customize them to fit the needs of the battle. Now, it wasn't necessarily historical that I could name my individuals the, shit stompers or something like that, but it was cool that I could. And as you can see throughout this particular video, each one of my units is named, and it's going to have its own individual stories that's going to come along with it. It adds a role-playing element. It makes it so much more interesting. It's not just random rifleman goes in and kills this guy. It's the Steel Legion is holding off 5,000 Confederates, and they held there for the entire day. You actually have a story and a name to go with that story, and it just makes it so much more interesting. You can also track their stats. You see what battles they participated in, and you increase their experience as they successfully make it from battle to battle. That's persistence and customization done absolutely right. I believe expanding upon these ideas can only lead to stronger gameplay. Now, of course, we've seen in different circumstances where that was not the case, but in this particular case, that is the right type of customization that I would like to see more of. It leads to, again, stronger gameplay and role-playing, which is great for a game. It adds replayability to a game. D&D, it's the same rule set over and over in 5th edition, but you can play the game different depending on the stories coming out of it. And in this particular case, Ultimate General becomes a story simulator, even though you are playing the same battles you've played over and over. They're going to be different every time because of the scale, because of the customization, and because of what you can actually do in changing your army and choosing how it's set up and so on. So expanding upon those ideas can only lead to better gameplay. Just to give it an example, officers having traits, strengths, and weaknesses, or having more skills to customize your divisions and brigades would also be phenomenal. It's already really cool that I have like the Sons of Terra being my favorite brigade, who've been through every single battle with me that I've fought. But what if I was allowed to customize them a bit further, maybe changing their uniforms, the types of bayonets they have, and to make a really bad joke, to make sure they all have the same trim of beard. Now, although that's really not something I would want to see, I don't care about their beards. That idea of being able to customize something that really shouldn't affect gameplay too much would also be a nice addition as well. Again, take for example the names. Being able to change their uniforms would be really cool, if completely ahistorical, but again, that's alright. Having units named Shit Stompers is not historical at all, but it would still be really cool to see that type of stuff in the game. The game in itself already has stellar customization options and personalization options available to you for your armies. From the fact that you choose what units you're bringing into the battle with you, you build up your armies throughout long, drawn-out campaigns, and they actually become personalized to you, just like games like XCOM and so on. That's done right. So, if anything, in the future titles, I want at least to make sure that those options stay, that they do not disappear in the next title. That's something you tend to see with yearly release titles like, again, the Total War series, where they're starting to strip out features. When they shouldn't strip out features, they should be adding more features, or they should maintain the features they already have that made their game good to begin with. So, I would like to see all of these options return, and hopefully additional options show up in the future. That's kind of my short little list. I could go on for a while. As you can tell, I'm very excited about this game and the future prospects that are going to come from this series. But I would rather go ahead and give you guys the opportunity to start messaging in the comments section and showing me what you think should be included in the next Ultimate General game. Personally, I would love to see maybe a medieval setting, an ancient setting, or a fantastical setting. I think it would be really cool. Do you feel the same? Probably not, but that's okay. Anyway, this has been Commissar Bro, and I'll see you guys next time.